At 32 minutes past 8 on the morning of the 18th of May, 1980, a 30-year-old volcanologist named David Johnston picked up his radio and said 5 words. Vancouver. Vancouver. This is it. He was 6 miles from Mount St. Helens. 6 miles is a long way. It is far enough that you would need binoculars to make out any detail on the mountain. It was also the distance the United States Geological Survey had chosen for that observation post, because at 6 miles on the far side of a ridge, a man was supposed to be safe. They never found his body. By the time the mountain finished, 57 people were dead. And when you look at where they were standing that morning, you find something that does not fit the story we usually tell about this disaster, because most of them were not where you would expect. Most of them were in places that someone with a map and a pen had already decided were safe. Stay with me, because that decision, who made it and why, is the real story here, and it does not arrive until the end. To understand it, you have to go back 9 weeks. On the 16th of March, 1980, Mount St. Helens produced a series of small earthquakes. It was the first sign of life from a mountain that had done nothing for more than a century. 11 days later, on the 27th of March, it erupted for the first time in over 100 years. It was not a large eruption. Steam blasted a crater about 250 feet wide through the ice cap at the summit. Within a week, that crater had grown to about 1,300 feet across, and 2 enormous crack systems had opened right across the top of the mountain. Through March, it erupted roughly once an hour. By the 22nd of April, the rate had slowed to about once a day, and then it stopped altogether. And that pause is where this story really begins. Because a volcano that goes quiet does not look like a threat. It looks like a false alarm. People had been watching the mountain smoke for weeks. Nothing had actually happened. And the longer nothing happens, the harder it becomes to keep people afraid. Somebody now had to decide where the danger was. On the 30th of April, the governor of Washington signed an executive order creating a red zone around the mountain. Inside it, without a pass, you faced a $500 fine or 6 months in jail. Late in April, officials had been asked to draw that zone 20 miles out from the mountain, in every direction. That is not the zone they drew. Now, understand what that decision actually is. It is not a scientific measurement. A line on a map is an answer to a question that sounds technical, but is not. The question is, how much risk is acceptable, and to whom? Draw the circle wide, and you shut down roads, logging, homes, and businesses, and you are wrong for weeks while nothing happens. Draw it tight, and it costs almost nothing, until the day it costs everything. The mountain had no opinion about where the line went. People drew it, and there was pressure on those people from every side, from a timber industry that wanted its crews back at work, from residents who wanted to go home, from a public that was, frankly, getting bored. One of those residents became famous. His name was Harry Truman, no relation to the president. He was 83 years old, and he had run the Mount St. Helens Lodge on the shore of Spirit Lake for about 50 years. When they told him to leave, he refused, flatly. He said the mountain would not dare hurt him, that he and Spirit Lake were part of each other. Reporters drove up to interview him. Schoolchildren wrote him letters. He became a folk hero, the stubborn old man who would not run from a volcano. Remember Harry Truman, because he matters at the end of this, but not for the reason you think right now. On the 7th of May, the small eruptions started again and carried on for 10 days. By the 17th of May, more than 10,000 earthquakes had shaken the volcano. And on the north flanks, something was happening that had never been watched this closely before in the history of the science. The mountain was swelling. The survey measured it with angles and slope distances over and over through April and into May. The north side of Mount St. Helens was pushing outwards, nearly horizontally, at a rate of about 5 feet a day. Not once, every day, for weeks. By the 17th of May, the north face of the mountain had moved out over 450 feet. Let that sit for a moment. A section of a mountain had traveled the length of 1.5 football fields, sideways, while people watched and wrote it down and photographed it. And the survey knew exactly what it meant. Their own conclusion at the time was that this was strong evidence that molten rock had risen high into the volcano. There was magma inside that bulge, not underneath it, inside it. The mountain was, in the most literal sense, a loaded gun, and everyone with a scientific instrument pointed at it knew that. And on that same day, Saturday the 17th of May, under mounting public pressure from property owners who wanted their belongings, officials allowed a convoy of about 50 carloads of people into the danger zone to collect what they could carry. They went in, they came out. Nothing happened. A second convoy was arranged for the next morning, Sunday the 18th at 10 o'clock. That second convoy never left, because by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, there was no mountain left to drive up to. It was the last full day the mountain existed. At 32 minutes past 8 the next morning, a magnitude 5.1 earthquake struck. Here's the part that matters, and I want to be exact, because the survey is exact about it. That earthquake arrived, their words, with no immediate precursors. On that morning, in that minute, nobody could have called it. Nobody got a warning. There was not one to give. The bulge had been creeping toward failure for weeks, and the earthquake was simply the moment it let go. The entire north flank and the summit slid off the mountain at once. It became the largest debris avalanche on Earth in recorded history. About 3.3 billion cubic yards of mountain in motion. The survey puts that volume at roughly 1 million Olympic swimming pools. Part of it ran 14 miles down the valley of the North Fork Total River, and when the flank slid away, it uncorked the mountain. Inside that bulge was a cryptodome, a body of magma, extremely hot under enormous pressure. The landslide took the lid off it in a single instant. The pressure dropped. Superheated water inside the volcano flashed to steam, and that steam expanded the only direction it could, sideways, straight out through the scar the landslide had just opened. That is the lateral blast, not up, sideways. This is the detail that made Mount St. Helens rewrite the textbooks. A volcano that fired sideways like a shotgun laid flat. It caught the landslide and overtook it, accelerating to at least 300 miles an hour. It tore the upper 1,000 feet off the cone. It flattened a region 19 miles across and more than 12 miles north of the summit. Within about 6 miles of the mountain, virtually no trees remained of what had been dense forest. Beyond that, they were laid flat on the ground, all pointing away from the mountain, like matchsticks combed by a giant hand. At the far edge, they were left standing and scorched 600 square kilometers, 230 square miles. In minutes, less than 15 minutes after it began, the ash column had reached 80,000 feet. Now think about who was underneath that. David Johnston was at Coldwater 2, 6 miles out, directly in the path of a blast nobody yet understood could reach that far. He had taken over that watch from another scientist, Harry Glicken, only 13 hours earlier. He got a radio call out. Vancouver, this is it. And then the blast took the ridge. His body was never recovered. A few miles to the west was a 48-year-old freelance photographer named Robert Landsberg. He had hiked in to photograph the mountain, and when it blew, he kept shooting, frame after frame of the ash cloud rolling toward him. And then he understood he was not going to outrun it, so he did something extraordinary. He rewound the film back into its canister. He put the canister in his backpack, and he lay down on top of the backpack, using his own body as a shield. 17 days later, they found him. The film survived. Some of the clearest images we have of those first moments exist because a man chose, in the last seconds of his life, to protect a roll of film so that other people could understand what had happened. And Harry Truman, the stubborn old man at the lodge, the folk hero, the one who said the mountain would not dare touch him, Harry Truman was directly in the path. The lodge, Spirit Lake, all of it, was buried under hundreds of feet of debris in the first minutes. No trace of him was ever found either. By the end of that day, the ash had blotted out the sun in Spokane, 250 miles away. Complete darkness at midday, a 4-hour drive from the mountain. 540 million tons of it went east across the United States. It reached the Great Plains. It circled the planet in 15 days. The mud flows kept going long after the blast stopped. The largest was still growing at midnight, 50 miles downstream, ripping out bridges and homes as it went. 57 people died. Mount St. Helens had been 9,677 feet tall. When the ash cleared, the highest point on the crater rim was 8,363. 1,314 feet of mountain was simply gone. The survey calls it the most destructive eruption in the history of the United States. So here is the official answer, and it is true. The earthquake came without immediate precursors. The lateral blast was a phenomenon that, in 1980, was barely understood. The science of directed blasts was rewritten by this mountain. Nobody could have stood there on that Sunday morning and shouted a warning in time. That is all real, and it is all in the record. But there is a different question hiding underneath it, and it has nothing to do with that morning. Because the warning was never supposed to come on the morning. The warning had already come. It came on the 16th of March. It came 10,000 earthquakes ago. It came at 5 feet a day for 7 weeks, in a bulge 450 feet wide that was photographed, surveyed, and correctly understood by scientists who said out loud that there was magma in it. And it came earlier than that, 2 years earlier. In 1978, the United States Geological Survey published a report, Bulletin 1383C. 2 geologists, Dwight Crandall and Donald Molyneux, had studied the mountain's history, and they put their conclusion in writing for anyone to read. They wrote that an eruption was more likely to occur within the next 100 years, and in their words, perhaps even before the end of this century. They printed that in 1978. The mountain erupted in 1980, 2 years. Not a vague feeling. A federal document on paper naming the threat before most of the people who would die had ever heard the name David Johnston. The information was not missing. The information was excellent, so the question was never whether anyone could have known. The question was this: knowing all of that, Where do you draw the line? And this is the part I cannot get past. Of the 57 people who died on the 18th of May, only 3 are known to have been inside the red zone, the area that was strictly off limits. 3 more were in the adjacent blue zone, closed to the public but open to permit holders. The rest were in places that had been considered safe, not places they had snuck into, not places they had been warned away from, places where a person was allowed to be on a map drawn by officials 7 weeks after the mountain started telling everybody exactly what it intended to do. And 2 years after a federal report said it was coming, now think back to Harry Truman. The old man at the lodge is the one everybody remembers, the one who was warned and refused and stayed and died. And we tell his story as if it is the story of the whole disaster, a stubborn person who ignored the warnings and paid for it. But Harry Truman is the exception, not the rule. Harry Truman got to choose. He was told the risk, he understood it, and he decided the lake was worth it. That was his to decide. The other 54 did not get that choice. They were not defying anyone. They were standing exactly where a map told them it was fine to stand. The mountain did not break the rules that morning. The map did. And the scientist, the one man out there whose entire job was to know how dangerous this was, who had every measurement, who had probably read that 1978 report himself, David Johnston sat down at 6 miles, because 6 miles was supposed to be enough. It was not enough for him either. If you want more of these, the ones where the paperwork tells the real story long before anyone died, subscribe. It is the whole reason this channel exists. Mount St. Helens is still an active volcano. It has erupted since, it will erupt again, and the line around it is still a line that somebody has to draw. Not a scientist in the end. A person, weighing a mountain against a road, against a payroll, against a convoy of people who want their things back and are tired of being told to wait. The measurement is science. The bulge was science. The 5 feet a day was science. The report was science. Where you put the fence is a decision. It always was. Which disaster should I cover next? I read every suggestion.